Hello, my name is Anna Wurzer, and this is Sarah Swingley, and today we will be doing our presentation on a study that we've been conducting with Dr. McManus. We have been researching different aspects of the Confederate flag and how that contributes to racist beliefs. Today we'll be presenting our study called Rebels Are Racist, a study of pro-Confederate flag ideologies and racial discrimination.
All right, so before we fully get into the study, I would like to note that there are different Confederate flags. The one that is in contention is the Confederate battle flag, which is pictured below. The top flag is the Confederate state flag. This flag was incorporated into state flags after the Civil War, the Confederate battle flag. The Confederate flag will be the focus of our research. However, it's one of many symbols of the Confederacy. So that is something that we would like to know before we dive in. To some, the Confederate flag is a commemoration of the sacrifices of their ancestors and a symbol of Southern pride, but to others, it's a very divisive symbol associated with racism, violence, and intimidation. And so the Confederate flag has remained as a point of contention for decades in the United States. There are still a lot of debates about what the Confederate flag symbolizes, and unfortunately remains as a very polarizing topic in today's society. For the purposes of our study, we actually conducted a series of 3 different studies, but we will be only discussing study number 3 today in our presentation. We were aiming within all these studies to be examining connections between pro-Confederate flag ideologies, which we will get into, other anti-social ideologies, and racial discrimination. All right, so we wanted to assess, what do people think of the Confederate flag? What are their perspectives of the Confederate flag? And through our research preparing for these studies, we determined that there are 3 perspectives for views of the Confederate battle flag. The first view of the Confederate flag is that it is a symbol of discrimination and racism. And this is due to its close associations with slavery during the Civil War, the use of the Confederate flag for white supremacy groups like the KKK, and the use of the Confederate flag in opposition to the civil rights movement. The second perspective that we decided to include in our study was that the Confederate flag symbolizes Southern heritage. For a lot of individuals, they believe that the Confederate flag symbolizes their culture and their Southern identity, and so therefore they remain more in support of the Confederate flag and using it as a symbol of pride. The third perspective that we decided to look at and create was that the Confederate flag symbolizes rebellion. And this is due to the fact that the Confederate flag and its support is not isolated to Southern states, but rather it's actually very popular in some Northern states in the United States, including Montana. And so during the preparation for our study, we wanted to look at why this is. And we determined that individuals do believe that the Confederate flag is a symbol of rebellion and kind of standing up to authority. And so that is a perspective that some people take on. So for our study, we decided to use those 3 perspectives: racism, heritage, and rebellion. And the hypothesis of our study was that exposure to pro-Confederate flag arguments will be associated with greater discrimination in helping situations. And looking at helping situations is one way that we decided to evaluate those anti-social ideologies that we had mentioned earlier. All right, so the methods for our study, we decided to recruit participants over a platform called MTurk, and this is a crowdsourcing online format. And so therefore we were able to get a larger range of participants from across the country. And so we had 187 participants in study number 3. And due to the nature of the study, we decided to only look at white participants in our analysis. Participants were randomly assigned to one of 3 separate manipulations, and these manipulations all were a variation of something called "I Have Something to Say." It was a blog post that we had written up and we used as the manipulation, and we wrote up 3 separate blog posts that each displayed the perspectives that the Confederate flag either stands for racism, heritage, or rebellion. And so these were the 3 manipulations that we randomly assigned participants to. They only read one of these 3 manipulations. And after reading it, we asked the participants whether or not they agreed with the author of the blog post, as well as whether or not they believed that the blog post was in support of racism, heritage, or rebellion. Following this, we decided to ask participants to either help a Black or white researcher. And this study did use deception. And so they did not know that this study that they were being asked to help with was actually manufactured by us. They did not know that for the nature of this study. That was revealed to them in the debriefing. But we asked them following the completion of reading the I Have Something to Say blog post. We asked participants to either help a Black or a white researcher. And for this, we decided to display a little bit of a bio for each researcher. We had a picture of the researcher, so their race was very evident and clear to the participant as they were reading it. And following this, we asked them 3 questions, and these 3 questions are our dependent variables. So the first is, how much do you want to help by participating in this study? And the second dependent variable is how beneficial to science they believe the study was. And the third dependent variable was how valuable they believed the study was. And as I had mentioned earlier, they were revealed the true nature of this study following answering these questions. We did tell them that this study that they were being asked to help with did not actually exist. It was for the true nature of the study that we were looking at, was to determine how their perspectives on the Confederate flag would influence their helping behaviors. And this is an example of that blog post that I had mentioned earlier. This is one of the 3 manipulations that we used. This manipulation is displaying the perspective that the Confederate flag stands for racism. So this is an example of what participants would read, and then they would be asked whether or not that the individual that had written this blog post agreed that the Confederate flag was a symbol of racism or if it was a symbol of something else. And then we asked participants whether or not they agreed with what the blog post author was actually saying about the Confederate flag.
All right, now we'll be moving on to the results section. Sarah did an amazing job explaining the method section. So now we're going to look into the results so that we understand what we found in this study. To analyze the data, we used a 3x2x2 ANOVA, each of those identifying one of the independent variables, either the flag condition, race condition, or whether or not they agreed or disagreed with the article that they read. And each of these were ran on each of these dependent variables. We're going to analyze each of these dependent variables individually in order to see the effect that they had. First, we're going to look at whether or not they wanted to help by participating in the study. So here we found a significant 3-way interaction. We only found this significant 3-way interaction when they disagreed with the article that they read. When they agreed with the article that they read, there was no significant 3-way interaction. So we're going to stay on this column over here. We actually probed this interaction further in order to see what it meant. And we found that participants were less likely to indicate that they would help a Black researcher if they disagreed with the article about racism than if they disagreed with the article about rebellion. So let's look at our graph again. Here, we see that the participants were less likely to indicate that they'd help the Black researcher here when they disagreed with the article about rebellion, but this number shoots way up when it comes to when they disagreed with the article about rebellion. So it's quite a bit different in both of those and shows that this was a significant effect. Our p-value was below 0.05, which shows that this was where we were seeing that 3-way interaction, and that's where that difference came from. Looking on to the next dependent variable, how beneficial to science do you think this study is? Again, we had another 3-way interaction with all of those 3 independent variables. And once again, this was only in the disagree condition. So when participants disagreed with the article they read, we found that there was significance in that 3-way interaction between the independent variables. Here, we found that participants who disagreed with the article about rebellion were slightly more likely to think the Black researchers' study was beneficial to science than those who disagreed with the racism article. So we're going to look at these last 2 columns again. Here we see that they were more likely in this rebellion condition to think that it was significant than those in this racism condition. So it depended on the previous condition they were in as to how they rated the beneficial nature of the Black researchers' study. Looking at the third dependent variable, we have how valuable do you think the study is? We had another 3-way interaction here in, again, the disagree condition. So when participants disagreed with the article that they read, we found that there was significance here. Probing this interaction, we found that participants who disagreed with the article about rebellion were more likely to think the Black researcher's study was valuable than those who disagreed with the racism article. So again, looking at these columns right here, we found that in this rebellion condition, when they disagreed with that, they were more likely to think it was valuable than here in the racism condition. A couple different reasons as to why we found these effects. There is something called the reactance effect in social psychology, which is when individuals believe that to some extent their freedom is being threatened, so they react in the opposite way. Here, we saw this in that individuals are less likely to help the Black researchers study, potentially due to a perceived threat to their freedom posed by the previously read article. So we're seeing when they disagreed with that article that they read, they might actually be less likely to help the Black researcher, specifically in the racism condition, because they were so opposed to that point of view that the Confederate flag stood for racism. Looking at the bend over backwards effect, this is almost the opposite of the previous condition. Here, the participant is feeling a sense of guilt that causes them to help the Black researcher more than they would have in the other condition. So here, their guilt regarding their previous response causes the individual actually to go out of their way to help the Black researcher more so than they would the white researcher. So that's a very interesting phenomenon as well that could be attributing to some of our results. We thought that
Yes, so Anna did a wonderful job of describing the results from our study and the possible implications for these results. And we just thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our presentation. And we hope that you found something interesting from this and that maybe there's something that you can apply to your own life. So we hope that you learned something new. And we just thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We hope that you enjoy listening to the rest of the SERV presentations.
Thank you. Bye.